Nick describing how the management class is burning through workers. I think you said something absurd like 150% turnover rate, whatever the fuck that's crazy. But you got to see the strategy. This class were to break the workers as they profit off of your labor value. And we need a new culture, and I love the new culture that is being established of maintaining strikes and pressure on the managerial class. I want you guys to understand they won air conditioning in their car. So what does that mean? That means that the management was allowing workers to drive in blazing hot temperatures, refusing to provide air conditioning in order to squeeze more profit out. That is class struggle. That's the definition of class struggle. Now, Shama Sawant and Worker Strike Back, they strongly advocate voting no on this contract. And as you said, Nick, everyone got to vote their conscience. We believe that there's much more to begin on the table, considering the position that we have and the leverage we have at workers. The ruling class is worried about their economy. We got them by the balls. And I'm gonna read this headline. I want to pass it back to Nick. I want you to kind of reflect on this as well, because even whether you guys vote no or yes, what you said, where this is a win of the working class, I do agree with that, because there's a reason why they broke the railroad strike. Because they didn't want the workers to get more. You had the management that said that July 5th, as you mentioned, we had nothing else on the table. Then the threat of strike happened, and you guys got more. That pattern, this culture, what the ruling class don't want. So I'm going to read this headline. I passed it back for Nick for any reflection. And Marco, I think Marco wanted to chime in earlier. So Marco, you can go after Nick, and I want to get the Valley Labor Report. I want to give you guys an opinion about the topic at hand as well. But here's a headline. UPS workers disproved corporate media's narrative that strikes are harmful. So, Nick, do you have any reflection on that headline and my words in general? And then I'll pass it to Marco, because I think you wanted to chime in earlier. But go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and it's that's still a sentiment. The idea that a strike would set us back is still a prevalent idea among a lot of people. A lot of UPS Teamsters, you see it online all the time, that we just have to accept this first offer, and anyone who's thinking about voting no and going on strike is really putting us all at risk, because we could end up with something worse, which I don't see how that's even possible. But all the unity we showed, all of the practice pickets, all of the very strong rhetoric from our leadership really has led to an amazing contract in most ways. It's just up to the membership now to decide whether it's good enough, because it is still in our hands. It's not decided at this point. It's up to the members to say yes or no. And I realized I forgot to weigh in on the worker co-op question before, which I'm skeptical of worker co-ops as a vehicle towards socialism, and I might be speaking out of ignorance on this, and the other panelists can correct me, but I feel like if that's what we want to put our focus into, there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, because co-ops, while they're definitely better places to work than privately owned corporations, there's a massive difference. I could never go back to a non-unionized workplace. The freedom I have to hold my management up to certain standards, and to have a huge degree of autonomy and a lot of rights, is just something I can never give up again. It's really an incredible difference if you've never worked in a unionized workplace before. And I'm sure most worker co-ops, when they're well organized, are even better than that. But if we're talking about how we're going to get from this neoliberal capitalist society that we're in now towards our vision of how society could be, co-ops, I think the limitation there is that they still have to operate within a capitalist marketplace. And if we're going to we have to answer the question of how it is that co-ops are going to overtake the private capitalist ownership system. And so is that going to be through transforming companies like UPS, which made $100 billion in revenue last year, which has I don't even know how many resources and the amount of capital they have. Are we going to buy them out? Are we going to create new firms from the ground up and, have our own workers co-ops version of Amazon and Walmart? And if so, how do we outcompete these companies that have, many trillions of dollars in capital, already have the buying power to set prices, already have such a massive infrastructure and command of the economy, where we're starting out with no resources, no capital. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, what I'm gonna do, let's do a short segment where we have an open panel where we discuss that quickly. Anyone want to chime in real quick? I'm sure that we won't interrupt each other. Anyone want to chime in
Yeah,
on that thought?
yeah. So here's the thing: if you look up the dictionary term of socialism, it is cooperative ownership. So it's not like something separate. Okay, it is um, owning the means of production and distribution through cooperative means. Okay, so that's one. Two, when you own the like I said, when you own the means of production, the supply chains, and all of that, there's no need. The need for striking would be over, because I mean, maybe because I understand that Marco, you was talking about like a union with inside of a cooperative. But as far as striking against the boss class, the capitalist boss, that would be in the rearview mirror. Okay. Number two, it guarantees American made manufacturing, since they would never vote to move. I know, like, even though UPS doesn't do manufacturing, they deliver, but they would, they would never vote to move the manufacturing plant outside of the community, state, country, rendering themselves jobless. It ensures high quality products and services due to the fact that workers are stakeholders having a common vested interest in the success of the company. So work morale would be high, guaranteeing highly qualified American made products and services get produced. They would not vote to replace their jobs with automation without at least creating new positions in the company for the human being. Okay. It's self regulating, because since the factory is located in the community, the moment they find out that they're operating in a way that puts the safety of the community or environment at risk, be it water, air quality, environment, safety, they'll change course. There would be no cover up, since everyone comes from that community. That would be affected, since everyone would know, and an incentive to stop that practice would be swift. Now, I've been hearing a lot, about people talking about bringing back nuclear power plants as a way to fight climate change. I say only if it is community worker owned, because self-regulation is self-explanatory in the case. They're not going to put their own self at risk. It's guaranteed workplace safety. That they're not going to put themselves in a position to be put at risk when it comes to workplace safety, like how Amazon, Staten Island, and Tyson Foods force their employees back to work into the workplace without the proper investment in protecting their employees from COVID-19. Okay. It provides a reliable tax base, because none of this, oh, you're going to tax me, I'm going to move out of the community, out of the state, out of the country, and then you won't have any jobs. They're not going to do that. You feel what I'm saying? So, and on top of that, it combats supply chain strains. So you've seen what happened during the lockdowns. See, through having homegrown supply chains, through the use of multi-stakeholder cooperatives, where the cooperatives of different industries, whether it's utility, worker, consumer, financial co-ops, by the way, are credit unions, producer co-ops, agricultural, form partnerships with each other to sell each other, all working together to establish their own supply chain, independent from corporate supply chains, freeing us from these free trade policies that have shipped our manufacturing jobs overseas, which leaves us vulnerable to these other countries who want to screw us over, as they, do their thing, and doing inflation and all that stuff. It protects from high unemployment, and workers are less likely, when the workers own it, they're less likely to go public, seeing that going public means handing your company over to a bunch of shareholders where you become the employees, And I believe UPS is public, right? So where the effect is to get out there and squeeze as much money out of the workers and consumers, to akin to squeezing water out of a rock that you can find to keep your shareholders happy, while at the same time plundering the natural environment, depleting it of its resources beyond its capacity to replenish itself, thus casting aside and being irresponsible for the damage done to communities, the environment, the economy, where it's seen as the cost of doing business, where let the government pick up the tab. Due to this fact, workers are less likely to be okay with going back to becoming employees. So you control it. You feel what I'm saying? With unions, understand you are still keeping the capitalist system in place. It's because unionization is more of a handcuff and a regulation to make sure that the capitalist system behaves. Where it's just like, go to that corner over there and think about what you did, where co-ops just replace it altogether. So, that's my argument, my pro cooperative.
Yeah, and I wouldn't quibble with any of that. I think that those are all very very obvious benefits of having the co-op. My question is co-ops as a vehicle to socialism, or just basically how we're going to do it. If we're going to replace the UPS with a workers co-op, do we do it by buying out UPS? Do we do it by creating a new company from the ground?
I want to get Marco in here too as well.
Sorry,
Marco, no worries, Roger. I love that spill earlier. Marco, do you want to chime in on that? And I want to get the Valley Labor Report in. I'm interested in hearing their thoughts on this as well. But go ahead, Marco.
Yeah. So Nick, the way I see the co-op strategy for UPS would be that the Teamsters Union organizes co-ops within the Teamsters Union, all kinds of businesses that the Teamsters do work with. And this makes the union grow, and as the union grows, these businesses that the union helped set up then take their profits and add it to the strike fund, add it to pay salters a living wage, add it to pay peppers the difference to a living wage, right? So like you can use when you actually own the means of production, it's an economic engine. And so the union needs to seize as much of the means of production that is within the union's grasp and use the profits of those organizations that are union co-ops to fund the attack on the big enemies like UPS. And like this is where the money's going to come for getting the mutual aid for the solidarity to keep people on strike. As the union can then bleed workers from the capitalists in their sector, those capitalists have less people to use in their machinations. And that's sort of the idea. And this is not just like a new thing. This is like what the Knights of Labor were doing at the end of the 19th century.
We can get Roger and Nick in here, and I will get Valley Labor Report in here. We got maybe another 10, 15 minutes. I think it's very interesting. I want to get your guys kind of final thoughts on this as well. But Roger, go ahead, chime in real quick, and then we get Nick in here, and I want to get the Valley Labor Report in the conversation.
So let me ask this: has anybody ever heard of the 2015 Model Corporate Corporate Charter Revocation Act? Nope. Okay. This is a law. This is a weapon that you can possibly use. This is a law that all state attorney generals have that allow them to revoke the corporate charters of corporations in their state. So establishing a record of egregious behavior by putting communities and the environment at risk, screwing over workers, screwing over the government with these public-private partnerships and communities. Okay, corporate charters are handed out by state secretary of states, but they can be taken away by attorney generals. Having a corporate charter is not a right, it's a privilege. Now, something else that can be done is you can have, maybe you use a ballot initiative or pass a law, something like that, to allow AGs to reissue out cooperative charters in their place, to restructure it in a way that either, like you was talking about funding, one of the things to fund it would be a public bank. Okay, because I'm not going to go too much in the public bank or whatever the case is, but they're a way to help ensure financial cooperatives that we call credit unions that can help to finance startup cooperatives or help in the conversion process to go from corporate to cooperative as well. Okay, so Massachusetts, if you take a look at the first 6 minutes of this week's Democracy at Work with Professor Richard Wolff, so he talked about Massachusetts passed a law. It was in the Boston Globe, June 14th, where it's a right of first refusal law that allows these businesses that are like retiring and they don't want to sell their business or whatever the case is. They facilitated a process that allows them to transfer ownership to their workers, because you're beginning to see a lot of boomers beginning to retire and they have their businesses, but they don't want to, close it, and all their employees don't have jobs, and their kids don't want it, or whatever the case is. So we have that out here in Long Island. There's a small group that does that. But I also had an idea of what I like to call a cooperative business administration that does a government agency, whether it's local, state, federal, that does for cooperative businesses what the Federal Small Business Administration does for small business, by providing counseling, tax resources, a voice, government contracting, consultation, education, training, financing, research, all to make it easier to form business cooperatives from scratch, or purchasing from the owner of a corporation to convert it to a cooperative when applying right of first refusal laws. So in recent situations, we've been seeing lately of workers uniting to unionizing, and corporate headquarters ends up shutting that location down when using that as a threat weapon example to other locations that they will do the same thing to them should they decide to unionize. So let's say a CBA, cooperative administration, would be perfect for workers who recently had their location shut down. Better yet, instead of taking the reactive approach, take the proactive approach, where the moment corporate HQ makes the threat of shutting their location down for attempting to unionize, they can go to the CBA and ask for help to offer to the community the same thing that their former current employer was offering before they leave or decided to leave after they threatened to unionize. So instead of seeing it as a loss of jobs, leaving the community, it can be seen as an opportunity to create something new, a consumer, community, worker cooperative in its place. The CBA can also be a source for inventors to go to as an alternative to having to go to private equity and wealthy capitalists at the like to go to provide seed money to help them invest in their inventions they are working on, with the stipulation that should that invention come to fruition and they wish to build a business around it, it must be worker-owned manufacturing. With each and every brick and mortar location they see to the cooperative gains the upper hand in real estate. So,
yeah, I want to get we have maybe another 5-10 minutes left, but I want to get the Valley Labor Report. I want to get Adam and them in here. There's a lot that was discussed regarding worker co-op and unions. I want to ask you guys: do you guys cover that? What your experience regarding the South, and what your opinions on the pros and cons of unions versus co-ops? I would love to hear what your opinion on this is, real quick.
Yeah, I want to first start just by echoing what Nick said about the tentative agreement for UPS. I think that that's the right framing. I don't love the language that I've seen some people using as far as calling it a sellout contract. I think that sort of impugns the motives of some of these people in organizations that have been really instrumental in making the gains that are in this tentative agreement possible. These gains would not have been seen under a Jimmy Hoffa administration, a Jimmy Hoffa Jr. Jimmy Hoffa Jr. would not have been raising the expectations. Jimmy Hoffa Jr. would not have been delivering a credible strike threat with locals across the country. That's just not what we would have seen. And it's because of workers on the ground across the country fighting for new leadership, which really, stresses the importance of union democracy and why it's important that one person is not allowed just unilateral control of the organization, because workers need to be able to choose their leadership, and the ability to choose their leadership has really changed the way that these contract negotiations have gone with with this round of negotiations with UPS. And so I think that Nick's framing is right, that this is a win. But the question is it enough? Are the workers going to vote yes or no? And we're obviously going to support them, whatever they choose here on the Valley Labor Report. And we've been talking about the TA basically all morning. We had a reporter on to talk about it. And then the second half of our show was all calls. We got about like a dozen calls from UPS Teamsters from across the country talking about their feelings. Some people voting yes, some people voting no, some people not sure. And so I think that there was a really good dialogue. And then as far as the cooperative stuff, my quibble with that is just that, and I'm sure that Roger understands this, that cooperatives are difficult to form for working people for the reasons that you could imagine, specifically the lack of capital. It is, you can't just go, even if I can go and sell people on the merits of cooperative ownership, that they just they can't go out and start their own businesses from scratch. And that's why what Roger mentioned, these political changes are important. The right of first refusal, that's something that Jeremy Corbyn in the UK pushed, and that's something that we think is very important. But the way to get that, I believe, is through the labor movement, is through unions. I don't think that you're going to be able to get something that is so huge as a right of first refusal, even though it doesn't seem like it ought to be huge. It is, because under current law, the owners of the business are under no pressure to even offer the company to the workers. We can take a look at what's happening over on the West Coast with Anchor Brewing. They're a 130-year-old brewery, historic in San Francisco, I believe. They were bought out by an international company, and the company is now trying to sell it for scraps, basically. And so the unionized workforce there is trying to buy the business from them, and they're not treating them seriously. They're not giving them the access to the same information as other potential buyers, and that's because of, they're under no obligation to. And so it's important to have a right of first refusal, but the way to do that, it seems to me, is by making it an issue in the labor movement. And it's easier, not every worker can start a worker cooperative. Every worker can unionize. Every worker can, work to create a union in their workplace. And if they're in a unionized workplace, they can become active in it and make it more effective. And I think that that's really important. Obviously, the cooperative stuff, devils are in the details. Publix is ostensibly owned by its employees, but it operates, the new hires, and you don't really get a say. It's just you own some of the stock. So devil's really in the details there. And then, Roger mentioned something about no strikes and that being a benefit. And, while it is true that most workers, you're not going to want to go on a strike because it's a difficult thing. There's real risk there, but you also lose the opportunity for political education, because with this contract fight, with the clash between the boss class and the worker class, the people who create the value and the people who, leech off of the profits that we create, there has been a significant interest in this contract fight by working people across the country. And we've seen that just in our own YouTube analytics, where our audience has grown 10, 15 times over the last month. And that's because people have been activated and interested, and they're interested in learning about what's going on at UPS and how they can do the same thing in their workplace. And you simply don't get that opportunity for political education and class consciousness with worker cooperatives, right? So those are some of our thoughts. And of course, we've talked about worker cooperatives. We've talked to, in fact, one unionized workplace that the bosses closed it, and they went on to create a worker cooperative, and we've kind of been following their stuff. They're down in Florida, the Mangrove Collective, and that's really cool, and we're really happy for them. And they're and so we're absolutely not against worker cooperatives, But unionization is something that is much more widely available, and I think probably at this point more politically powerful.
And if I can just chime in to say, yeah, to echo those comments and say, I don't see them as oppositional. I see them really working in conjunction because ultimately, for me at least, the idea is how are we shifting power into the hands of working people? We directly control means of production through a cooperative structure. That is shifting the power. If we're organizing in the workplace and creating a union and securing a good contract or extracting concessions from the bosses, that is building our power, and we can only do that through those relationships and that solidarity that we're creating in that organizing process. So I don't really see them as oppositional. In fact, I think that the labor movement and the co-op movement have to work in conjunction with each other and really have more dialogue. Because if you have if our goal is a more cooperative society or a more cooperative economy, we have to have a theory of change. How do we get there? And I would argue that the only way we get there is through the organizing of working people and through building power of working people, building that people power. And so obviously, we believe that unions are a key vehicle for that, and that the labor movement is a key vehicle for that. So I think, I really do think there are ways that the two movements can really intersect and work together to really make working people's lives better. And, there are intermediate and like short-term, wins, and then there are the long-term big picture ideas. And whether, we're winning short-term victories or long-term victories, I think it comes from working class power and solidarity. And, hopefully that translates in multiple ways to include co-ops.
I want to get Andrew in here. Andrew, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll keep it pretty brief, but I think Nick, your kind of hardening question is the one that needs to be asked in every situation. Where can you get the capital to start a workers' cooperative? How can you build workers' cooperatives? What industries can you strategically try to build them, seed them in to have the maximum impact? So something that Marco put me onto is the Worker Ownership Loan Fund. They can give loans of very small quantities up to around $500,000 to workers who are going to start worker-owned cooperatives. And workers cooperatives, in my mind, and I think what you have to be to qualify for something like the Worker Ownership Loan Fund is not just that everybody gets a little bit of stock option, but that there is a syndicalist-like process of democratic decision-making among the workers for how the cooperative is run. Not just that everybody gets a little, cut of the stocks. So there's the Worker Ownership Loan Fund. I think, Roger, you mentioned the Democracy at Work Institute has a lot of different resources you can read and check out on the process, because something like writing your bylaws was really difficult for us in starting our cooperative, because the state of Washington has draft bylaws you can use for every type of corporation except for a workers' cooperative. So, and they will even go after somebody who is giving away that information for free if they're not a lawyer who's approved by the bar. So there's all these, there's definitely hurdles you have to get over. But ultimately, I think where does the union movement or where does the cooperative structure actually bring us closer to socialism? I think you kind of run into the same issue, which is that there are political hurdles at the end. So there was a brief moment, I think, in the 80s or the 90s where Conrail, which was a bunch of previously private railroads that were nationalized, turned into a slightly more efficient, profit-creating, worker-screwing organization, and then sold back into private hands. There was a brief moment in time where that Conrail could have been sold to the rail workers' unions. But because there wasn't, a workers' political engine that was strong enough to make that happen, that was a missed opportunity. And so there's almost like the same there's like the same barrier. If we're on two different sides of a mountain, which is the labor movement, and we're getting to the top, at the end we run into the same part that we have to climb over. And so I think there are things like tool libraries, the Worker Ownership Loan Fund, other community resources are already available for people who want to start workers cooperatives. But you do ask the right question, which is, okay, but then how can you build a plan that is workable and that has traction and that people can follow, push that farther than, well, now you're just a small fish competing with large, well-resourced organizations that don't like your business structure in the capitalist, national and global economy. So I just wanted to say, really quickly highlight that there are those resources that exist already for people to start co-ops, everything from, capital that you could get from a credit union, or from the worker ownership loan fund, or potentially, like Marco said, from unions. I think the New York Nurses Union Association, or I don't remember what their exact name is, but they've just kind of recently announced that they are publicly announcing that their support for workers cooperatives as a strategy for workers. And I would hope that would mean if some healthcare workers got together and contacted that union, they'd be willing to put up money for that. So I'll keep it short. I know we're over time. Nick, thank you very much for giving me a last kind of response there. But yeah, I think this was a lot of really good info we all brought up.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we got a hard out now. This is a very interesting conversation, because I think, and this is what we focus on RBN all the time, is strategy. Strategy is something that a lot of people miss out on, and worker co-op versus unionization in terms of increasing the power of the workers is a very, very important conversation.